The Green Party have secured a major boost as a recent poll of teachers who are members of the National Education Union overwhelmingly backs them. They are top with 37%, whilst Labour trail on 29%, a huge gain of 25% for the Greens. The poll also shows a seismic problem for the Labour Party. Delta Poll surveyed 3,751 NEU members in England between December the 12th and 15th. The poll found that while 60% of the respondents said they voted Labour in 2024, 18% would do so if a general election were held tomorrow. Unions have been the natural home for the Labour Party, and whilst union leaders have been highly critical of Keir Starmer, most of them have stuck with the party. Now, what makes the NEU poll significant is the fact that so far, unions haven't gotten behind the Green Party, but that could possibly change. Meanwhile, the right-wing politicians and commentators see this new poll as evidence that we're moving towards communism. Aaron Banks tweeted, "Crackpots and communists teaching our children." Adam Brooks also tweeted this. "Imagine being an educated person and thinking that voting for the Greens was a good idea. Open borders, more asylum seekers, legalised heroin and crack cocaine, men in wigs in women's safe spaces, guaranteed economic disaster. Green communism." I mean, words have no meaning anymore, do they? Fonseca, do you find this significant, or do you expect unions in the future to endorse the Green Party?
I think it is significant. It's definitely part of a broader shift where we've seen a huge number of different groups and demographics of people move towards the Greens directly away from the Labour Party. You know, young people are another one of those demographics, right? So it's definitely part of a broader movement of the Greens just really eking into Labour's kind of voter base because Labour are not catering to those people. I also think, teachers have been at the sharp end of austerity, I think, over the last sort of 15 years or so. I've spent a lot of time personally in schools with Naked Politics. We have a schools program, so I listen to teachers moaning all the time about how crap everything is. I know they're suffering a lot from cuts. The NEU leader, I think, said a couple of months ago that, there were cases of people struggling to manage because of support staff cuts. You had teachers who would stop drinking water during the day because staff toilets were broken. They had nowhere to go to the toilet, which is just kind of obscene working conditions, right? I think in this week as well, there was a story about a school in Stoke-on-Trent where the pupils were left shivering because the PFI contract ended without the necessary school repairs having been done. So teachers are very much, I think workers who've really felt the sharp end of austerity over the last 15 years. And I'm not surprised that they're abandoning the Labour Party. Whether or not the unions institutionally break away from the party, I think, is a different matter to individual members liking the Green Party and voting and supporting for it. I think it would be a phenomenally historic thing, to be honest, to see unions en masse sort of reject the Labour Party, and there'd be some pretty dire financial consequences, I think, for the Labour Party if that happens, despite, I think, people like Morgan McSweeney's best efforts to inject much more private finance into the party. I'm pretty sure the party is still actually really quite reliant on union funding and union donations, right? I think one thing that's interesting that happened at the end of last year in relation to this was we had the election of Andrea Egan, for example, who was elected as General Secretary of Unison, and she kicked off with a bang, pretty much telling the Labour Party, get your act together, become a proper workers' party, or we might leave. And I was stupid enough to make a bunch of political predictions for 2026. And off the back of that, I do think we may start to see an erosion of union support for Labour, so that this may be another telltale sign that bedrock of support for Labour is really starting to crumble. A lot of this hinges, I think, on how Labour move forwards, especially assuming Keir Starmer has gone after the local elections. He's got a bit of a Damocles sword hanging over him at the moment, right? Where, he must know at some point he's probably going to go. Once they get past that, can they promise the unions enough to make them stay? Can they go bolder than what they've currently gone on at the moment? All they've offered workers for the most part is, some stuff around the Employment Rights Bill, which is better than nothing for sure. Like, I'm grateful for some of the stuff that was in there, don't get me wrong, but it's not bold enough. It's not really changing the landscape in terms of wages and working conditions for many different workers across the economy. Is the Labour Party really prepared to have Blue Labour sort of loosen its grip on policy and actually offer something proper for people to keep the unions on board. So I think this is maybe like a tiny little microcosm of that kind of end game. It's crazy to say that because this is a party that's been in government less than 2 years, but it's a kind of end game sort of mark, I think, where the Labour Party does need to start making some serious decisions about whether or not it's actually prepared to work properly with unions and reflect what unions want. Otherwise, they're going to have some serious financial problems as well as serious electoral problems.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned Andrea Egan, obviously the newly elected General Secretary of Unison. And like, she's been the one who seems to be serious about potentially cutting ties with the Labour Party. I mean, we've heard Sharon Graham from Unite say it, but I think it's all talk. There's no action there. Whereas Egan has spoken about potentially aligning with your party, but I do think maybe the Greens should be in there in terms of union backing. What I do find funny from a lot of the right wings who are calling this communism is they're not understanding the sort of material conditions in which teachers find themselves and in why they're sort of breaking apart from the Labour Party. But I mean, what do you make of the right wing thinking that our education system just pushes communism?
Yeah, I mean, it's just insane. It's like proper insane in the brain politics. I mean, I think they know it's nonsense as well.
Mm.
That's the thing. Like, they're doing an act. It kind of reminds me of, like, if you've seen, I think it's the head teacher, Britain's strictest headmistress, like Catherine Bilbao Singh, who does this kind of weird, like, Roald Dahl villain character act where she pretends to be really strict and she just comes on TV and talks about how the schools are infiltrated with Marxism and communism. It's total nonsense, and I think they know that. Do I think most teachers personally skew liberal or left? Yeah, probably. That's just the way it is. In the same way, if I go into the banking sector, most people are going to be right wing. God, I'm not going to walk into the banking sector and be like, God, where are all the socialists? So I do think that's true. And like you said, ultimately, it's the fault of some of those people who are moaning about teachers and calling them Marxists. It's their politics' fault. You probably radicalized some of these people who maybe otherwise would have been more centrists or like right wing people. You probably radicalized them into becoming more left wing because the situation in a lot of schools is seriously dire. And I just will say this: there's nothing wrong with teaching communism in schools. Like, if you look at the citizenship curriculum, which is something that every school is supposed to teach children, we're meant to talk about a wide variety of political ideologies. There's nothing wrong with talking about communism. I've done that in schools as well as talking about other, types of political ideologies. We're meant to teach kids to think critically, like not to teach them what to think, but how to think. So there's obviously nothing wrong with that. But the implication, I guess, with them is that these kids are receiving a biased education, which is, biasing them towards communism. In my experience as a facilitator who goes into schools quite a lot, I think teachers are actually super cautious about what they teach kids about politics, and they're really scared of like effing up and not being impartial and not delivering a kind of wide variety of different ideologies in schools. So I find that completely counter to my experiences. I think that's something teachers actually take really seriously. I think the other thing I will say is this, which is probably the most important thing, which is that there is a long history as well, I think, of the right, the radical right, the far right, being highly suspicious of educators. And I think educators, teachers, like they're a particular type of working person that I think really gets under the skin of some of these right wing people, because I think they are a threat. People with knowledge and education, and they have power, right? In a political sort of landscape where you're really trying to narrow the scope. You're trying to narrow the scope of what people see and what people understand and control information. And teachers are kind of an anathema to that, right? They're a bit of a threat to that. Think about McCarthyism in the 1950s. Some of the people who got some of the harshest treatments were teachers. Teachers who were accused of teaching communism at school, of pushing un-American agendas through schools, for example. And I think this move, which they know is an exaggeration, but I think this move to frame teachers as sort of crackpot manipulators of children was quite a visceral image, really, to give people. That means that other political demands that they may have, like fair pay, better working conditions, having smaller class sizes so children can learn better and more, have a higher quality of education, they can then dismiss all of that stuff as well because you've already characterized these people as crackpots and left-wing weirdos.